Are there any laws in the North Pole? There aren't many people there, but you don't need that many people to do something illegal. The question is, what's illegal in a place like that? The jury may be out on whether Santa lives in the North Pole or even if Santa's real, but the North Pole is a real place with a few residents, and the question of who runs it and what they get to do there has been a hot debate for a long time. If Santa had his elves working in a huge toy factory all year long, there would be at least 5 countries who wanted to stake a claim on some of those products and profits. That's because under international law, no one technically owns the North Pole. It's basically a neutral territory that many countries have decided to co-manage. They do that on the Arctic Council, which is made up of the United States, Russia, Canada, Norway, and Denmark. These 5 countries all have something in common. Some part of these countries' waters touch the waters of the North Pole in some way, which means they all feel they have a claim. In international law, there are 2 kinds of legal categories for areas of the ocean. The first is national waters. Those are parts of the ocean within a certain number of miles of the country's coastline. National waters are considered to be part of that nation, and they make rules about what can and cannot happen there. But when you go past national waters, you get to international waters, and that's a whole other story. No one owns those parts of the ocean, so national laws generally don't apply there. The North Pole has some strange rules when it comes to national and international waters. Normally, whoever owns the North Pole would own the national waters around it, but no one owns the North Pole. That's why Denmark, Russia, Canada, Norway, and the US all make claims of certain parts, because their national waters are right next to the North Poles. Each country has claimed 14 miles of water near the North Pole as theirs. That's the area that each country is allowed to fish and conduct commercial business in. But outside of that, it's kind of a free-for-all. The legal term is the heritage of all mankind. There's one part of the North Pole that a lot of countries want to claim for themselves. They're called the continental shelves. These are parts of a continent that are usually covered by water, although sometimes they can be exposed by moving tides or droughts. They're the underwater parts just beyond what we think of as the beach, and they are actually crazy valuable. In the scheme of the ocean, they're not very deep underwater, so they're easy to access. But more importantly, the reason people want to access them is because they are full of oil and various natural resources. Most offshore drilling and underwater mining happen on continental shelves, if that gives you an idea of how valuable they are. And the North Pole has a bunch of continental shelves. That's why everyone wants them. The natural resources of the North Pole are so valuable that several countries would fight each other to get them. And that's why the United Nations had to create rules for how a country can claim them. They created a set of international laws with the totally badass name of United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. Those laws govern maritime activity, and as of 2025, there are almost 170 signatory countries on board. If a country thinks they have a reasonable claim to resources in a North Pole continental shelf, they have a decade to request exclusive rights to it. Many countries have laid claims, including Russia, Canada, and Denmark. The US has too, but that's where it gets tricky. The US claim is technically not legitimate because in order to be able to make a claim, your country needs to have ratified the agreement. But the US hasn't done that with the Convention of the Law of the Sea. Sorry, I just wanted to say it again, it sounds awesome. The US doesn't want oversight on their drilling, so they didn't sign, and that means they don't get to drill for Santa's oil. Most countries are very protective of their North Pole territories because they're not easy to come by. Take, for example, Hans Island. It's a tiny little island, about 16,000 square feet. You could easily fit 10 of these islands in your average Walmart. Back in the 14th century, Hans Island was a hunting ground for Inuit, but by the 1800s, any wildlife there was gone. So the island doesn't have much actual value, but for strategic value, that's a different story. The island is close to both Canada and Denmark's waters, as well as being close to North Pole waters. So basically, whoever owns that island maybe has more access to the North Pole resources. That's how it became the focus of what is known as history's friendliest war. Now, no shots were fired, no blood was shed, but both nations have insisted that the island is theirs for about a century. In the 1980s, a potential skirmish ended with Denmark planting their flag on Hans Island with a bottle of schnapps, followed very soon after by Canada planting their own flag and a bottle of rye. Do you ever wonder if Santa Claus is breaking any labor laws in the North Pole with all the worker elves who have to build toys all year round? Are there even labor laws in the North Pole? who does Santa Claus answer to? Well, it's not the Arctic Council because they mostly focus on maritime and ocean issues. The Law of the Sea and the 2017 Polar Code are just about fishing, maritime behavior, and conduct between ships, but nothing about what to do on land. The laws on North Pole land mostly protect animals, things like the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. But since the North Pole is so inhospitable to human life, they didn't really bother coming up with laws governing what people should and should not do there. Which I guess means that there's no one keeping an eye on what Santa Claus is doing. So he could be running a sweatshop, making elves build toys for him, and it wouldn't technically be against the law. Of course, that's not just a North Pole thing. Many big international companies have factories in countries where labor laws allow for longer hours and lower wages. But here's the big question. How does Santa Claus get away with having a team of reindeer as pack animals? Reindeer are a protected species in most parts of the world where they live. In 1937, Franklin Roosevelt passed the Reindeer Act, restricting ownership of reindeer in Alaska to Native Americans only. There are similar rules in Norway and Sweden, where only the indigenous Sami people can own and handle reindeer. But there's a problem because Santa Claus is Turkish. That's right, we know where the historical Santa Claus was born. It was a place called Patara, a major seaside fishing city in Turkey.